And then something extraordinary happened in 1912. The greatest forest fire that any living human being had ever seen happened in the Northern Rockies. It was a dry summer. The woods were dry as timber. What we know now is these kind of forest fires always happened, but not all that regularly. That's what we know now. Then it was an extraordinary event. And they had a bunch of lightning strikes, and they had a bunch of small fires that were started by the Transcontinental Railroad throwing sparks. And they would take these Forest Service rangers and a few volunteers and a few conscripts off the street, load them up on mules and send them 40 miles up into the woods with picks and axes and shovels to fight these fires. And the story in this book is about what happened when it all came together in a massive lightning strike and the Chinook wind blew across eastern Palouse of Washington, blew over the Northern Rockies and exploded. And it went over the top of these people at 80 miles an hour and it burned them to a crisp. Burned whole cities to the ground, killed people like crazy, burned up $1.8 billion worth of the public's timber in 1912 values. And Roosevelt, in his righteous indignation, said, this is what happens when we do not protect the public's assets. This is what happens when we dismantle a professionally trained protection of the public's asset. And he declared war, and he won the hearts and minds of people. And in spite of a tremendously corrupt political system, in spite of hyper-rich tycoons that controlled the media in many cases, controlled the inside of baseball politics in many cases, Roosevelt won. Roosevelt was so furious he ran for president again under the Republican ticket. He won every primary in the country except 3, and the insider baseball power brokers of the Republican Party nominated Taft for a second term anyway. Roosevelt was so furious he declared the Bull Moose Party, an independent party, took the Republicans on, split their vote, the Democrats won, he delivered all the progressives from the Republicans to the Democrats, and the two parties have never been the same since. And every bit of it is in this book. Each chapter is a chapter about the heroism of the firefighters, and then a chapter about Roosevelt, and a chapter about loading up whole towns on trains and running them into train tunnels and shutting the train down and hoping that the fire didn't suck all the oxygen out and kill them all. I mean, we're talking about a story that gives you goosebumps. And I can't talk about it without being emotional. That's how powerful it is. But what we're really talking about is how Roosevelt won that fight. The way Roosevelt won that fight was speaking to millions of people through the media, capturing their hearts and minds to preserve this conservation legacy that he had created. Now, what I want to tell you is we have not faced a threat to the core conservation framework of this country since then of any real magnitude. We have always assumed that we would manage the public's asset with our refuges and our forests and our landscapes. We would always assume that we would have a fundamental framework of environmental regulations. We have always assumed we'd have at least some dedication of funding to maintain that legacy, that well-trained legacy, the kinds of people like Reese, Brian, that we heard from, the kind of people like Ed. We've always assumed we would have that until now. Right now, in this country, there is such a focus on the deficit, there is such a focus on the budget, there's such a focus on these environmental regulations which suddenly are perceived as job killing, that we simply can't afford that stuff anymore. And I respectfully disagree. I will not stand by and watch us dismantle it. You know, many fish and wildlife professionals in this country were shocked and aghast when House Resolution 1 passed the House of Representatives relating to the 2011 budget. It essentially dismantled conservation funding at the federal level in this country. And not only that, it had a bunch of very, very damaging appropriations riders essentially neutering the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act. I mean, you read it in the newspaper. Now, the Senate didn't go along. We ended up fighting to a compromise. We ended up surviving the 2011 budget and the 2012 budget with reasonable, rational cuts. But the battle is yet on for 2013 budget because these guys have not recognized what the people really think. And what I want to talk to you about is what the people really think. This election coming up will be a test of what the people really think. Whether it relates to eagles, or whether it relates to salmon, or whether it relates to our environment, or whether it relates to the priorities of our country. Now, conservation funding in America is 1.2% of the budget, so we're not solving any deficits by zeroing it all out. But I'm here to tell you we can sure screw up the economy by doing it. 1.2% of the budget is down over 10 years from 2.4% of the budget. So it never was much of the federal budget. It's even less of the federal budget now, but it is a powerful jobs engine in this country. And as I travel around and talk to wildlife advocates and environmental groups and universities and fish and wildlife professionals working in agencies, I give them a little wake-up call. Right now, when I'm working in Washington, D.C., I don't talk about biodiversity. I don't talk about loving eagles because I love eagles. I talk about the economy and I talk about jobs because that seems to be right now the language that carries the day. So let me just give you a few factoids about how important conservation, outdoor recreation, and historic preservation is. And the reason I use those three legs of the stool is because they are the foundation of an organization that has arisen in America to tell the story about why that 2011 proposed budget, House Resolution 1, that actually passed half of our government, was the wrong way to go. And 1,300 organizations signed a letter to Congress saying, don't do this. Do not zero out funding for conservation in this country. 1,300 organizations. Organizations from hardcore environmentalists to hardcore hunting organizations and everybody in between. They said, do not do this if you care about our economy. And here's why. Because conservation, outdoor recreation, and historic preservation creates $1 trillion worth of economic value a year in this country. $1 trillion. Now let me put that in perspective. That's substantially more than residential home building creates in this country. Residential home building brought down the whole damn economy. That's how important it is. You ask any elected official in Congress, would you automatically defund something that supports the foundation of residential home building? They'd say, what, are you crazy? We're trying to solve the deficit. You don't solve the deficit by screwing up revenues. You don't solve unemployment by creating more unemployment, particularly at a massive scale, and yet that's what they're doing. I don't think they're doing it on purpose. I think they're doing it as collateral damage as they have a battle of values over conservation. 9.4 million jobs in this country a year. Conservation, outdoor recreation, historic preservation. 9.4 million jobs matter. And these are jobs that can't be outsourced to China. They can't be outsourced to India. They can't be sent below the border to Mexico. These are jobs that are real jobs. They're jobs that continue. They're not stimulus jobs that are going to go away in a year and a half. They're jobs that if we take care of the environment and the fish and wildlife populations and the livability of our communities, those jobs will be there for the long term. They will keep on giving. But you know, if the guys in Congress don't know it, we're not moving the needle. So when I'm invited to speak, that's what I want to speak about. 9.4 million jobs. Outdoor recreation industry is growing 3 times the rate of the general economy. When we invest $1 in wetland restoration, we return $2 to the economy by filtering our water and not having to treat it. These are hard. Even if you don't care about wildlife, you should care about the economy, you should care about jobs, you should care about not screwing up revenues in this country because that will make it more difficult to deal with the deficit. Hunters and anglers put $1 billion a year on the table in their fees and excise taxes, and all they ask for is a reasonable match from government to do something that's good for this country, good for our economy, good for our children. That's the battle. Now, what I tell fish and wildlife agencies is you need a new message and you need a new messenger. And to any wildlife advocate in this room, and by the way, I know for sure every one of you is a wildlife advocate in this room, what I want to say to you is continue to enjoy this webcam and continue to enjoy these eagles, but do not think that is sufficient. We are in a fight for the very fabric, for the survival of the very fabric that Theodore Roosevelt and those other visionary leaders created 100 years ago. And if you save all of your energy for Ed Clark and the guys who are running the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, and don't give any of your energy to this bigger picture look at the crossroads we're at, we will reverse the kind of trajectory we have for eagles and so much more in this country. Think about what it means where I come from in salmon country. 4 times as many people and essentially the climate of San Francisco. What it means probably here is at least a doubling of the people in the Chesapeake Bay by 2100. I don't know the specific demographics, but I'll bet it's a doubling. I'll bet it's at least a doubling, and I'll bet it's the climate of Savannah. Because the climate doesn't care whether anybody politically decides to believe it's going to change, it's changing. Anybody who actually studies it and actually publishes in it knows it's changing, and it's changing. It's the equivalent of us deciding that we're not going to accept our doctor's diagnosis. Well, it's a free country, you have the freedom to not accept the diagnosis. Except you do so at your peril. No, really our children's peril. And what they're doing. That's what we're fighting, that's what we're dealing with right now.
Hi, I'm Jim Martin. I'm presenting at the Eagle Conference in Norfolk, and I give Christina permission to post any and everything I say, and I hope the whole dang world looks at it.